Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reading on the Rock at Covenant United Methodist Church in Rochester, New York. I'm Reverend Ann Kemper, blessed to be pastor here at Covenant. Tonight, we're going to continue our series of reading favorite children's stories. And maybe the stories are ones that adults like to read to their children or grandchildren, or ones young people enjoy reading themselves. Covenant places a high priority on children's literacy and on finding ways God appears to us in simple ways, even within the pages of a children's book. So I hope you enjoy tonight's story.
Hello, good evening also. My name is Val Clark, and I have the privilege of reading one of my favorite stories today to you. It is called The Keeping Quilt. It is by Patricia Polacco, and the publisher is Simon & Schuster. And here is the front cover of the book, The Keeping Quilt. The Keeping Quilt by Patricia Polacco. When my great-grandma Anna came to America, she wore the same thick overcoat and big boots she had worn for farm work. But her family weren't dirt farmers anymore. In New York City, her father's work was hauling things on a wagon, and the rest of the family made artificial flowers all day. Everyone was in a hurry, and it was so crowded, not like back home Russia. But all the same, it was their home, and most of their neighbors were just like them. When Anna went to school, English sounded to her like pebbles dropping into shallow water. Shh, 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 shh. In 6 months, she was speaking English. Her parents almost never learned, so she spoke English for them too. You probably have children in your class, some of your friends, that are learning English. The only things she had left of back home Russia were her dress and babushka she liked to throw up into the air when she was dancing. Look at the illustrations here. And her dress was getting too small. After her mother had sewn her a nice new one, she took her old dress and babushka. Then from a basket of old clothes, she took Uncle Vladimir's shirt, Aunt Havila's nightdress, and an apron of Aunt Natasha's. We will make a quilt to help us always remember home, Anna's mother said. It will be like having the family in back home Russia dance around us at night. Notice just the things that we're talking about are in color. And so it was. Anna's mother invited all the neighborhood ladies. They cut out animals and flowers from the scraps of clothing. Anna kept the needles threaded and handed them to the ladies as they needed them. The border of the quilt was made of Anna's babushka, and this is the border. On Friday nights, Anna's mother would say the prayers that started the Sabbath. The family ate challah and chicken soup. The quilt was the tablecloth. Anna grew up and fell in love with great-grandpa Sasha. To show he wanted to be her husband, he gave Anna a gold coin, a dried flower, and a piece of rock salt, all tied into a linen handkerchief. The gold was for wealth, the flour for love, and the salt so their lives would have flavor. She accepted the hanky and they were married. Under the wedding huppah, Anna and Sasha promised each other love and understanding. After the wedding, the men and women celebrated separately. And there you see that quilt. When my grandma Carly was born, Anna wrapped her daughter in the quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carly was given a gift of gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold so she would never know poverty, a flour so she would always know love, salt so her life would always have flavor, and bread so that she would never know hunger. Carly learned to keep the Sabbath and to cook and clean and do washing. Married you'll be someday, Anna told Carly. And again, the quilt became the wedding huppah. This time for Carly's wedding to Grandpa George. Men and women celebrated together, but they still did not dance together. In Carly's wedding bouquet were a gold coin, bread, and salt. Carly and George moved to a farm in Michigan, and great-grandma Anna came to live with them. The quilt once again wrapped a new little girl, Mary Ellen. See her right there? Mary Ellen called Anna Lady Grandma. She had grown very old and was sick a lot of the time. The quilt kept her legs warm. On Anna's 98th birthday, the cake was a colic and rich cake with raisins and candied fruit in it. And here's Grandma and the family around. When great-grandma Anna died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. My mother, Mary Ellen, was now grown up. When she became a bride, the quilt became her huppah. For the first time, friends who were not Jews came to the wedding. My mother wore a suit, but in her bouquet were gold, bread, and salt. Do you remember what the gold, bread, and salt stood for? The quilt welcomed me, Patricia, into the world, and it was the tablecloth for my first birthday party. Patricia is the author of the story. She's the one that wrote this. At night, I would trace my fingers around the edges of each animal on the quilt before I went to sleep. I told my mother stories about the animals on the quilt. She told me whose sleeve had made the horse, whose apron had made the chicken, whose dress had made the flowers, and whose babushka went around the edge of the quilt. The quilt was a pretend cape when I was in the bull ring, or sometimes a tent in the steaming Amazon jungle. At my wedding, men and women danced together. In my bouquet were gold, bread, and salt, and a sprinkle of wine, so I would always know laughter. So that quilt has come a long way, and they started doing things a little differently each generation. Many years ago, I held Tracy Denise in the quilt for the first time. 3 years later, my mother held Stephen John in the quilt for the first time. We were all so proud of Tracy's new baby brother. Just like their mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother before them, they too used the quilt to celebrate birthdays and make superhero capes. See the birthday celebration? The quilt was as a tablecloth, and now look at the superhero. As the years passed and Tracy and Stephen were growing up, their grandmother took pleasure at every family gathering to tell the story of the quilt. We all knew whose clothes made each flower and animal. My mother was lucky enough to show the wonder of this quilt to my brother's grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. Look at the family there. When my mother died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. Tracy and Stephen were now all grown up and getting ready to start their own lives. And here again is the Keeping Quilt. And it ends by saying, "And now I wait for the day that I too will be a grandmother and tell the story of the Keeping Quilt to my grandbabies." Wasn't that a wonderful story? That's the end of the Keeping Quilt by Patricia Polacco. So this story, I really hope that you enjoyed it. It is one of the favorite books that I used as a read aloud in my classroom. Patricia Polacco has written several books, and maybe later on I'll share some of them. This story told you all about families and culture and things that they did together and cherished. There were hard times in their lives, but they had a deep faith, and they decided that we stay together. And the most important thing is that we have love for one another. And you also notice they had neighbors come in and help with that Keeping Quilt. In my family, there is not a particular garment or an item that we have. Well, yes, there is one item that we have. And that item is a graduation card that my mother and father gave me way back when I graduated from college. And it's called the Graduate's Creed. Now, my mother and father has passed. They have gone to heaven, just as grandma and great-grandma did in this book. But that very card they gave me many, many years ago, I share it with each of the graduates in my family. So I've read it at my children's graduations. I've read it at my nieces and nephews' graduations. And I've also read it at my grandson's graduation from high school. I do that to let them know that the love that their grandma or great-grandma, and they would have called her mom, have and still have, and their papa still has for them, and how they look over them all the time. So I wonder what kinds of things that your family has, what traditions they have or things they've passed down. Why don't you go back and ask mom or dad or grandma or grandpa that question and let me know. Send me a chat, send me a message. I'd love to hear that from you. Thank you and have a great night.
That was wonderful. I loved it. I can see why it was a favorite children's story. Would you please pray with me? Storytelling God, thank you for the gift of good books and meaningful lessons. Help us to find you in the pages of our favorite stories. Amen. Thank you for joining us here at Reading on the Rock. Good night.
Reading on the Rock is presented by Covenant United Methodist Church in Rochester, New York. If you like Reading on the Rock, please give a donation on our website, covenantroc.org.